BBC One. Now the 6 o'clock news with Martyn Lewis and Jenny Bond.
The BBC television presenter Jill Dando has been murdered outside her London home. She was taken to hospital with severe head injuries and died shortly afterwards. Police say her attacker was a well-dressed white man in his late 30s or early 40s. Two other headlines: NATO destroys the last bridge over the Danube and claims the Yugoslav government is cracking. And members of the Bradford and Bingley Building Society vote to take the money and become a bank. Good evening. One of Britain's most popular television presenters, our BBC colleague Jill Dando, has died after being attacked outside her London home. Jill, who was 37, was found with serious head injuries and taken to hospital where she was confirmed dead. The Queen has led them many tributes. She said she was shocked and saddened by the news. The Home Secretary described her death as a tragic and appalling loss.
It's a quiet, pretty avenue in southwest London where Jill Dando had lived for several years. Shortly before midday, some of her neighbours were alerted that something was wrong. Two women went towards her front door and saw someone lying on the doorstep. A third neighbour joined them.
I heard the scream.
You heard it?
I did hear a scream.
Did you hear a man's voice or anything
No,
like that?
no man's voice at all.
And did you hear a shot or did you...
There was no shots.
Something
That's what I would say was a shot. I wouldn't have thought there was a shot, no.
From your assessment, what appeared to have happened to her?
She was obviously attacked, and whether she was attacked with a knife or whether she was attacked with some sort of instrument, but she certainly... She is obviously very shocked what happened, and...
She was conscious, she was talking?
She wasn't conscious when I saw her.
And what did you do, dial 999 straight away?
I personally didn't, but the people I was with, the two ladies who also live in the street, dialed the number and had the ambulance services there within 10 minutes. Or
what did you do with Jill? Did you comfort her or?
No, obviously we were there, but without any sort of medical history between the three of us, you know, the best thing was just to keep her sort of, unless she had woken up from her consciousness, and help her, but we left her there until the ambulance services came.
You saw this man yourself?
I have a particular vision of the guy. Yes, I did see him.
Tell us what you saw. What exactly was he doing? How close were you? What did he do?
He walked very calmly away from the scene, and when I actually saw him, I thought nothing of it. I thought, in fact, it could have been a friend of Jill's when I heard the screaming. That's why I particularly at that moment didn't do anything that now I wish I could have done.
Taken by ambulance to Charing Cross Hospital, she remained unconscious, having suffered serious head injuries.
Jill Dando arrived here by ambulance at 12:30 p.m. Despite all efforts by hospital paramedics, ambulance paramedics and hospital medical staff, she was certified dead at 1:03 p.m.
Several people saw a man near the house at the time, saying he was walking briskly, possibly running away.
A man was seen leaving from outside number 29 Gowan Avenue, and he ran east down this road towards the Fulham Palace Road. A man between late 30s and 40s, white. He was carrying a mobile phone, he was clean shaven, and he had dark hair. The witnesses describe him as being well groomed, possibly wearing a jacket or a suit. And anybody who knows that man or anybody else who saw that person out there, we would like to speak to.
The street has been sealed off all day, with a police investigation launched into the death of someone known to millions of people through television, whose neighbours knew her and who was an outgoing, friendly person, modest about her celebrity. Like many in the public eye, there were reports that she'd attracted unwanted attention from strangers. However, she was hugely popular and had just embarked on a new television series, presenting an antiques programme. She was planning to get married to Alan Farthing, a gynaecologist, later this year. Tributes to her have been coming in all day. She'd worked successfully on a range of programmes, and she was appreciated well beyond the media world.
Jill Dando was someone who was known to virtually everybody in this country, if not personally. She was someone who was at the height of her powers. She had done a huge amount, personally, in the fight against crime by her role, not least in Crime Watch UK, and therefore This makes her death all the more poignant.
I think she was a very modest person. She had genuine warmth. She was the same, on screen and off screen. I think it was her ambition to be in broadcasting. She wanted to be a broadcaster of, breadth. She did the news, she did Holiday. She wanted to make popular mainstream television and be, at the heart of a news service as well. I think she, and somehow she touched people. People loved Jill.
A post-mortem took place this afternoon. So far, the police have not said how she was killed. It's rare that a reporter can say that a murder victim was the kind of woman who had no enemies. I can say that about Jill Dando. Her death is a shock to all who knew her personally, and also to millions of people who knew her as a friendly, charming person on television. Kate Adie, BBC News, Fulham.
And a short time ago, Jill Dando's brother Nigel talked about how much he would miss his sister.
It does seem like we all knew Jill Dando in some way, through the television or whatever. I mean, how do you remember it as brother and indeed as your dad?
Well, as I say, I mean, she was, as far as my dad's concerned, I mean, she was a devoted daughter, and for me, sort of loving sister. Well, I mean, we're going to miss her, obviously, dreadfully. And I think people who knew her in a way through her appearances on TV, they're obviously going to miss her greatly.
And how will she be remembered in Weston as well? We've cruised around here today and met people who know her involvement with the hospice in amateur drama.
Well, that's right. I mean, she started, as you're probably aware, she started her journalistic career on the local paper here in Weston-super-Mare, the Western Mercury. And although she'd gone on to work for the BBC in London, her roots were still here. She had a lot of friends here. She's devoted a lot of time to charitable causes in and around the Weston-super-Mare area, and she gave a lot of her time to good causes in Weston. So, I mean, as I say, people, not only the immediate family, but a lot of other people in Weston and the Weston area who are going to be deeply, deeply saddened by what's happened today.
When did you last see her? Was it?
Saw her on Easter Sunday, and she and her fiancé Alan Farthing and my father had all come over to the house where my wife and I live near Bath, and we'd all had Sunday lunch together. So that would have been about 2 or 3 weeks ago. Yeah, she was on good form. Looking forward to her wedding. So obviously, as I say, we were so looking forward to that, and now this. So you can imagine how we feel about that.
Jill Dando was one of television's top presenters for more than a decade. She joined the BBC's Breakfast News show in 1988 and went on to present several of the BBC's most popular programmes, including Crime Watch and The Holiday Show.
Same man. So your calls really do count as a result.
She was the golden girl with a golden personality, who on programmes like Crime Watch made broadcasting seem effortless and charmed viewers and colleagues alike. Today, they were stunned by her death.
The shock is really palpable. She was somebody who had, I can't believe we're talking in the past tense about her. She was somebody who had such joie de vivre, such, passion about life. She was everything one could want in a colleague and a friend.
This brings back memories. I had my first job on this paper.
She grew up and first became a journalist in Weston-super-Mare. Last year, she went back for holiday, revisiting old haunts, meeting old friends. The shy little girl became one of the nation's most famous faces, but she never lost her rapport with ordinary people, never became a prima donna.
The last time I saw Jill, we had lunch. We walked from my office to a nearby restaurant. We reached some traffic lights and she almost caused a pile-up because 3 different drivers were busy watching her rather than watching the road. And she was always amazed at the fact that people found her attractive.
Good evening. Urgent talks have been taken.
From Weston, she went to the BBC in Plymouth by way of local radio. They soon saw she'd go far.
She had a sense of humour. She was bubbly. She was the girl next door. She was that sort of person, and everybody liked Jill. She got on very well with everybody, so she was held in a lot of affection by everybody here.
London soon beckoned. She'd begun presenting breakfast television in 1988.
There is just one story this morning, the dramatic end of the Gorbachev era in the Soviet Union.
For 7 years, she had an affair with the programme's editor, Bob Wheaton. Today, he recalled her warmth and gentleness. In spite of her fame, she'd remained the person she'd been all those years ago in Weston-super-Mare, a girl from a Christian home who'd had a dream and lived it.
Atmosphere has led to any alteration in weather patterns.
She was a regular presenter of the 6 o'clock news, but refused to let her name go forward when the BBC was looking for a single presenter of the programme. Off-screen, she was constantly busy with charity work.
She was the sort of person that we all grew to love. She was exactly as everybody sees her on the TV, warm and loving and friendly.
Her private life was often public. Earlier this year, she announced her engagement to a doctor she'd met on a blind date. She'd reached a peak in her personal as in her professional life. On screen, she was a natural, will be remembered for her sheer professionalism, but also her unfeigned warmth and kindness.
Well, joining us now in the studio is the Director General of the BBC, Sir John Birt. John, how will you remember Jill?
Like so many people who've just spoken, a person whose public persona was the same as her private persona. As we all know, she was a warm, loving, friendly, unaffected person, and that's how she was with the teams that she worked with in the BBC, with her family and friends, and it's those qualities that the audience at home saw and learned to love.
As you say, she was relatively unaffected by her fame. It almost seemed to take her by surprise.
She remained extraordinarily modest. She wasn't a prima donna. Fame had not gone to her head. I've been talking to all the programme teams that work with her today, and they all say the same thing, which Jill mucked in. She was one of them. She was an ordinary member of the team.
John, thanks very much indeed.
Detectives are now trying to establish a motive for the murder. Our correspondent Fergus Walsh has been looking at why Jill Dando may have been targeted in such a brutal attack.
Colleagues and friends here in the BBC newsroom who worked alongside Jill over many years are devastated by her death and are asking the question, why? Jill's work on Crime Watch helped solve hundreds of criminal investigations, including several murders, and it's not impossible that as a result, someone bore a grudge. Another possibility is a stalker. Last year, the BBC wrote a strongly worded letter to a 62-year-old man who'd repeatedly sent her cards and letters and called at her home. It accused him of harassment. He stopped contacting Jill as a result. A leading criminal psychologist says all celebrities face potential dangers from being in the public eye.
One would take threats seriously. One would perhaps curtail one's life a bit, but there's a limit. You cannot live totally protected, and so this is a risk for anyone who is well known and well loved. One can attract these very dangerous admirers.
The BBC says it will be doing all it can to ensure the safety of its presenters.
Anyone who is in the public eye, and Jill was in the public eye more than almost anybody, does have certain threats or certain risks that are put before them, and we must make sure we do all that we can to make sure that none of our presenters are put into any undue risk whatsoever.
Just this week, Jill Dando was on the cover of the Radio Times, promoting her new programme, The Antiques Inspectors. Her successful career was entering a new phase. The investigation into Jill's death is in its earliest stages, and police are keeping an open mind as to the motive and the attacker. Whatever they discover, there is a tangible sense of shock and of loss here in the BBC tonight.
As we've heard, police are searching for a smartly dressed man who was seen running away from the scene. He's been described as white, in his late 30s or early 40s, 5 foot 11 inches, with black hair. The police officer in charge of the investigation, Detective Chief Inspector Hamish Campbell, is at the scene of the crime in Fulham. Good evening. We have a good description there of the man who was seen running away. Do you have any idea at this stage of what happened to him next?
No, I'm afraid not. We know that he ran west in Gowan Avenue towards the Fulham Palace Road. Now, he may have got into a car or got onto a bus, gone down to Putney Bridge or gone north to Hammersmith. We've no sightings after he was seen leaving Gowan Avenue.
There are reports coming in of an incident at Putney Bridge. Apparently part of that area has been cordoned off. A police boat is in the river. Some kind of search is underway. Is there some connection with the crime?
That's being investigated now. Officers from my team are down there. A man was reported to be seen climbing over the railings at about the time or shortly after this incident, but I can't connect them at this time. A search is being made of the park, and the river police are assisting us in a search to see if we can find anything. At this time, nothing has been found which I can say can link to the incident of Jill Dando.
Hamish Campbell, thank you. And our reporter Pete Hunt is at Putney Bridge. Peter, what more can you tell us about that incident?
Well, as you can see, there are several officers behind me. Two of them are in the river, another one is on the bank, and they're searching this bank of the River Thames. We're about half a mile from the house in southwest London where Jill Dando was murdered. They've been here since 2:20 this afternoon. They came here when they received this call that a man was seen acting suspiciously around here. As you heard that police officer saying, there've been no sightings of the man, but since then they've also been checking the bushes along that riverbank, and they did take away an item about 10-15 minutes ago. They took it away in a box, obviously for further checks to see whether it was in any way connected, but we have no clues as to what it was they found.
Peter, thank you.
And police have issued two numbers for anyone with information about the crime. They are 0181 246 0730 and 0181 246 0734. And there'll be a tribute programme to Jill on BBC One tonight at 9:35.
And other news now. The head of the International Red Cross has been allowed to visit the 3 American soldiers seized by Serbian forces nearly a month ago. It's the first time outside visitors have seen the men since they were captured on the Macedonian border. The Prime Minister has condemned the Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic as a pariah even in his own region and warned that NATO's bombing campaign will be stepped up.
The last bridge across the Danube gone. From today, the only way of crossing here at Novi Sad in northern Yugoslavia is by raft. A NATO airstrike overnight that's wiped out a vital military supply route and destroyed Belgrade's last link with Central Europe. NATO's resolve, says Tony Blair, has if anything been bolstered by its weekend summit and the strong support from the so-called frontline states surrounding Yugoslavia.
What was remarkable was the view of the front-line states that the NATO action was just and that NATO must win. Milosevic is now a pariah even in his own region.
So we expect International Red Cross to help us.
An appeal to the International Red Cross in Belgrade today, but also from President Milosevic, a concession. The Red Cross chief managed to secure a short meeting with the 3 American soldiers captured last month and a promise they can see a doctor tomorrow. But what NATO seems most intrigued by are the latest comments of this man, Vuk Draskovic, currently Yugoslavia's deputy prime minister. 2 years ago, he was a leading opposition politician, a familiar figure at anti-Milosevic rallies. Always a maverick, he's now criticised his fellow government ministers openly and urged them to start telling the truth about Kosovo. A sign, says NATO, Belgrade's unity is beginning to crumble.
Now, as you know, Vuk Draskovic is no friend of NATO. He too has a past in promoting Serb nationalism. But at least the statements that he made last night show that there are senior members of the Yugoslav government that are beginning to recognise the reality.
And that's all the more reason, say NATO leaders, for strikes to continue. This village 60 miles south of Belgrade, Serb TV claims, has been hit 8 times already. But the air campaign, Tony Blair today confirmed, is set to intensify still further. Bridget Kendall, BBC News.
The nail bomb attacks on London's ethnic minority communities were described today as an attack on the whole of British society. The Home Secretary, Jack Straw, said catching the bombers was the top priority for the police, but he warned there could be more attacks. Police forces are on heightened alert following the explosions.
A symbolic warning of more terrorism to come. Brick Lane today, 48 hours after the latest racist bombing. The work of repairing the damage went on all day. And with a campaign of attacks now in prospect, questions are being asked about the ability of the police to respond effectively.
I think the anti-terrorist squad are very well trained, but very narrowly trained in looking at objectives. And I think they need to do some homework on far-right extremist groups. They're certainly up to speed with the Provies and the Loyalists and such other groups, but they're in new territory here.
As a result of Saturday's explosion, the anti-terrorist branch is now at full strength after scaling down for the IRA ceasefire. MI5 and special branch intelligence on the far right is being reassessed. Racist extremism is now under the microscope. Websites on the internet spew out a litany of racial hatred. Many emanate from the United States and Scandinavia. This one, homegrown, makes a specific reference to the bomb in Brick Lane, congratulating those responsible.
What they do is they use the internet to communicate, and of course they use encryption, coded messages on the internet to speak to each other. So it is a very difficult problem for the authorities.
This afternoon in the Commons, the Home Secretary insisted that the bombers would not succeed.
I want to make clear that any attack on these communities is an attack on all British people and upon the whole of British society. We will not tolerate racism of this kind, still less this pernicious and abhorrent violence as well.
In the East End, the police investigation continues, but the fear is there may be another attack before a breakthrough is achieved. Jon Silverman, BBC News.
Members of the Bradford and Bingley Building Society are likely to get windfall payments of around £1,000 after they voted in favour of converting the society to a bank. But they'll have to vote on the issue again, and it's likely to be at least a year before there's any payout. The vote is a major setback for the Building Society movement.
More than 500 members came to Bingley to debate the future of Britain's second biggest building society, and most of them wanted things to stay as they were. But the 1.5 million who took part in the postal ballot sent out a clear message.
62% voted against Bradford Bingley remaining a mutual building society. Exceptional results.
The directors said they would listen to that message and take steps to convert to a bank. It was Stephen Major, a plumber from Lisburn in Northern Ireland, who forced the society to hold this vote. He said members would get big windfalls.
Well, they will have around £1,000, £1,500 worth of free shares in Bradford and Bingley. They'll have twice yearly dividends, and the shares will rise in the future.
20, 40, 60, 81.
It was the prospect of that cash which won the day, despite warnings from the board that conversion to a bank would mean worse rates for savers and borrowers. Tonight, the society was sticking to that prediction.
The rates will have to reflect our new status. There'll be no immediate move on rates, but we'll remain competitive whatever we do.
But they will not be as competitive as what a building society can offer.
That's true. The rates, the mortgage rate will have to go up, and savings rates will have to be reduced in due course.
For those who've argued that it's only the building societies which have forced the banks to offer competitive rates, today's vote is a very serious blow. The remaining societies will be feeling very vulnerable tonight. Rory Cellan-Jones, BBC News, Bingley.
The governing body of European football, UEFA, says its plans to hold the Euro 2000 Championship in the Netherlands and Belgium next year won't be affected by last night's football riot in Rotterdam. Fans of Feyenoord went on the rampage after their team won the league. 16 people were injured, including 4 who were shot by police.
Nearly 250,000 fans had gathered outside Rotterdam's town hall to celebrate their team Feyenoord clinching the Dutch First Division title. The huge crowds appeared good-humoured at first. It was when they began to disperse that the trouble began. Some supporters who refused to move off began throwing stones and bottles at police. Pitched battles followed, with some fans using banners as a weapon. This man was brought down by plainclothed officers. More than 70 people were arrested during several hours of rioting, which spilled into surrounding streets. Officials say that at one stage, police fired warning shots into the air, but were then forced to open fire into the crowd. 4 people were hit, and 1 man is said to be in a critical condition. Police are investigating reports that some fans may have fired back. In all, 16 people were injured in the riots, including 4 policemen. It took till midnight to restore order, but not before many shops had been looted and cars wrecked. Dutch football officials described the riots as too sad for words, and a government minister warned of new powers to round up suspected hooligans. For Rotterdam, it could hardly have been a worse advert, with the city hosting the Euro 2000 final here next year. John Andrew, BBC News.
Britsh Airways is blaming a mischievous prank by a passenger for a scare involving almost 400 people on a flight between San Francisco and London. A recorded message warning of an imminent emergency told those on board to prepare for a forced landing on water. In fact, there was no emergency, and the airline has apologised for the distress.
3 hours after leaving San Francisco, passengers on flight 286 were told to expect a forced landing at sea. The words of the announcement apparently left no room for doubt.
Attention, attention. This is an emergency announcement. I repeat, this is an emergency announcement. It may shortly be necessary to make an emergency landing on water.
Passengers were then told to put on life jackets, fasten seatbelts and brace themselves.
Most people started to look around for signs that this was either a false alarm or a drill, and then it started a second time, a second playthrough, and by which time most people thought that this was real, and we started to put on our life jackets.
But it was a false alarm, triggered in a cabin crew area. BA's ruled out a mistake by crew members or a technical fault, and says a passenger must have pressed an emergency button.
It's a very, very difficult instruction to set off because it's actually under a plastic flap. So if there was somebody who needed to do that maliciously, they would have actually had to lift the flap up and then press the button.
Cabin crew had to call for help from a doctor because several passengers were so distressed. British Airways says it's contacting all of the passengers on Saturday's flight to apologise for the upset. Simon Montague, BBC News.
The film star Sean Connery has been trying to revive the fortunes of the Scottish National Party just over a week before electors in Scotland elect their own parliament. He told an SNP rally in Edinburgh that Scotland should be the equal of all the other nations of the world.
And Sean Connery!
The world's most famous Scotsman said the introduction, and Sean Connery may need to be that and more if this once-only appearance is to rally the SNP and help them catch up with Labour and win against the odds. First, though, a swipe at the media for the way some papers have written off his party and attacked him.
I'm ashamed of them, and I'm angry with them.
No policy detail, this was a declaration of faith in Scottish independence and an attack on the SNP's opponents.
When we were up here for the referendum vote, there was a spirit and a positive enthusiasm. Well, the control freaks have blown it away. They have replaced it with fear and intimidation, the very same way as others have before them.
The small, invited audience loved that, of course, but Labour's Scottish secretary wasn't too put out.
I think Mr Connery is entitled to his views, and he's here primarily, as I understand it, to promote his film, and I wish him every success with that. But I don't think the election contest is about a celebrity head count, and we will certainly continue to stick to the arguments.
1, 2, 3. The other parties clearly see Labour and not the SNP as the party they have to beat now.
People in Scotland don't want independence. They know it would be a financial disaster. But unlike Sean Connery, we can't actually opt out of it and spend our lives in tax exile.
I think Sean Connery is a very good actor. We all enjoy his performances, but he's not a politician. We all know he's SNP anyway, and I think people will be quite unmoved. The truth is, the SNP campaign has fallen apart.
The fight for control of Scotland has been low-key, and that suits Labour. Now the nationalists need to win over and win back voters who prefer low taxes and who feel safer as a permanent part of the British Union. This campaign isn't over yet, but it may take more than an emotional appeal from a famous actor to turn the tide the SNP's way. John Pienaar, BBC News, Edinburgh.
Well, now back to our main news tonight. One of Britain's most popular television presenters, the BBC's Jill Dando, has died after being attacked outside her home in London. She was found with serious head injuries. Our reporter Clarence Mitchell is at the scene in Fulham. Clarence, are the police uncovering any clues in the street?
The police investigation, Martyn, is at full swing now. There are at least 30 detectives involved in this. Behind me, you can see the activity outside Jill's home here in Gowan Avenue in Fulham. That will continue for some time yet. The very detailed forensic examination of the scene, the post-mortem examination of her body is ongoing, not too far from here, and that, we're told, will continue for some hours yet. The principal aim of the police is to establish just who this man was who was seen running off. To that end, they've established an incident room at Kensington Police Station. I'll briefly give you a telephone number, 0181 246 0730. If anybody with any information has anything to say, the police would very much like to hear from them as soon as possible.
And very briefly, Clarence, any more details about the search at Putney Bridge?
We're told that is continuing. Again, the police are aware of reports that a man was seen acting suspiciously. Some reports suggest he actually
jumped into the Thames, others that he was attempting to. The area around the bridge is now sealed off, and police using river boats on the river are searching. Unconfirmed reports suggest they're looking in the Battersea area, perhaps for a body, but none of this is confirmed, and the police are not connecting it directly. Equally, they're not ruling it out as possibly being connected with the awful murder of Jill Dando.
Clarence, thank you very much. The murder of our friend and colleague Jill Dando dominates tonight's news. Jill was special, not only to the millions of you who watched, admired and loved her over the years, but to all of us who had the privilege and delight of working with her. The news was best when it was read by Jill. None of us could have believed it would one day be about her. Good night.